Welcome to the Book Show, a celebration of reading and writers. I'm Joe Donahue. Joe Nesbø is the internationally best-selling author, best known for his mystery series featuring his protagonist, Harry Hole. His latest is a twisted, multi-layered, mind-bending spin on the classic horror novel, The Night House. In the wake of his parents' tragic deaths in a house fire, 14-year-old Richard has been sent to live with his aunt and uncle in the remote, insular town of Ballantyne. Richard quickly earns a reputation as an outcast, and when a classmate named Tom goes missing, everyone suspects the new angry kid in town to be responsible for his disappearance. No one believes him when he says the telephone booth out by the edge of the road sucked Tom into the receiver like something out of a horror movie. No one, that is, except Karen, a fellow outsider who encourages Richard to pursue clues that the police refuse to investigate. Joe Nesbø has won the Raymond Chandler Award for Lifetime Achievement with his book selling over 50 million copies worldwide. Again, the new novel is The Night House, and it is a pleasure to welcome Joe Nesbø to this week's book show. Joe, thank you very much for being with us. What a pleasure to have you on the program.
Thank you so much for having me, Joe.
Well, the obvious question, I guess, is at what point did you know you wanted to write a horror novel?
Actually, I think that was obvious, at least for most of my friends when I grew up, that at one time I would tell at least one more ghost story, because when I grew up, we would, going on summer holidays, we would gather in the attic, all the kids, my relatives, and they would point to me to tell the ghost stories. And I was, kind of proud because I was the youngest kid. And so for years, I thought it was because I was, the best storyteller. It was only later that they told me that they liked me telling the ghost stories because they could hear the fear in my voice when I told the stories. I guess it simply was because I was able to scare not only them, but actually myself also telling the stories.
Did you find that to be the case in telling this, that you try to scare yourself?
I think that when coming up with the ideas for the story, I think it's I work much as a comedian. I mean, I once asked a famous Norwegian comedian, "How do you know that a joke is good?" And he was very analytic about writing his jokes, and he said that, okay, after you have followed all the rules, you have to make sure that you get that gut feeling, that it's bubbles in your stomach, as he put it. And I think it's the same with horror. That is, at the end of the day, I can use all my methods, all my experience to write a story. If it doesn't scare me at some level, it's no good.
What I love about this novel is by the 8th page, and I don't think I'm giving anything away because it's the cover of the book, but by the 8th page, a guy has already been sucked up by a phone. I mean, that's pretty great.
Yeah, I mean, that was, I guess, part of the basic idea for when I started writing the story, and my working title for the novel was The Meat-Eating Telephone. It was from growing up, we would phone strangers and just see what happened, and I always found that really scary, that we would, just like in the Night House, that we would end up phoning the wrong guy.
So who in the publishing industry turned down the title Meat-Eating Telephone? Because
all of them. Yeah, I love the fact that you like it, because I was the only one who really loved it.
it seems like a winner to me.
I hung on to that title for a long time. I guess they were a bit worried that it would get the same reaction that you did now, that they were finding it really funny. But it is kind of, I mean, I think horror in general is quite funny, at least horror in American and European tradition. You do get some really scary Japanese horror stories where it's hard to laugh. But in general, I think for me, the kind of horror that I enjoy, it's fun.
There is a fun nature to it, of course, and I think that was one of the questions I wanted to ask you about, is how much you worry about believability, which is something I think in your other novels you would be very concerned about, and in this novel, you don't have to worry about it as much, I would think, because it's the genre. It's what you expect from horror.
Yeah, and I think it's like in any other story, it's like you have a grace period of in the theater they say 3 minutes, and in the book maybe of, yeah, 8 pages or something like that, where you have to sort of you know, you can do anything. It's the period where the readers are willing to accept anything, and so you have to create a universe and give the rules of the game in those 8 pages. And so what I do in this story is, of course, that I make it a bit bigger than life, heighten reality. And when at page 8 you have had a telephone eating a boy, you know that what kind of story you're in for, or actually you don't know what kind of story you're in for, but you're pretty sure it's not going to be a realistic story.
So tell us about Richard. He has been sent to live with his aunt and uncle, and the town is Ballantine. And he's an outcast of a kid, and is a good kid, but obviously has had a lot going on in his very young life.
Yeah, well, I think it's always interesting to break the one of the golden rules of storytelling, is save the cat. To have your protagonist, it doesn't have to be good, but it has to do at least one good deed during the first 10 minutes of a movie, so that you know that this is the guy we're going to root for. But in this case, he doesn't save the cat, actually more or less kills the cat during the first 10 minutes. So you start with minus 10 points for the antagonist, and then what you must make into the protagonist. And so it's my job then to convince you that this guy that you hate after 10 minutes, you are actually going to like this guy. You just you need to get to know him, and I will give you the reasons why he's acting and behaving the way he is. And gradually, hopefully, I'm winning the readers over, or Richard is. He has moved to this little town to his uncle and aunt, and we'll learn a little later that his parents died during a fire. The circumstances of the fire is not clear. We will learn that also later. And so the things that starts happening in Ballantine is somehow connected to a house in the forest, the night house. But it seems that Richard is to blame for 2 kids missing. So he's sent to home for, well, he's sent to prison, actually. He's just 15, but it's more or less a prison where he's sent. And from there on, he and Karen cooperates to solve the mystery. But that is actually just the first act of the story. There's 3 parts in this story that are together makes the whole story.
Joe Nesbø is our guest. The name of the new novel is The Night House. When the voices call, don't answer, it says on the cover of the book. After having written mystery stories, and you touched on this earlier, but do you fall into that genre easily, in the sense that you know what you want it to be, or is there some research or some look that you want to say, okay, I want to know a little bit more about the genre?
For me, it's always based on a singular idea. It's and that idea can be anything. It's not like I wake up and I'm thinking, maybe how about writing a horror story. In this case, like I said, it was the phone eating the boy. That was the idea for this book. And another novel, it may be the title. For example, I had a novel called The Snowman, and the whole idea for the novel was the title, The Snowman. Most of the time, I come up with the titles just before the book is going to print. But in this case, it was a starting point. Or it's a character, it's a perfect murder, or it's a conversation I had with a friend at a coffee shop. Could be anything. In this case, was a phone eating a guy.
You mentioned that the book is in 3 parts, and the first part is the longest. is that really the difficult part of setting Richard's story and putting all of those blocks together to form the foundation for the entire novel?
As a writer who's done it, crime stories, you have the privilege, sort of a license to manipulate your readers. And
Yes.
that is definitely what I'm doing here too. It's like you what you see is not really what's going on. It is going on, but maybe there's something else going on a different level. So actually talking about the three different parts in this story is sort of a spoiler. But I think it's fair to say that, be on the outlook for anything that might suggest that what you see is an illusion.
By the time we're done reading, do you want us to know exactly what happened, or are you okay if we have questions in our minds?
I think it's okay to have questions. I think for me the important part is that you've been entertained and that you at the end you go, oh, so that was what happened. It's like the end of The Usual Suspects, the movie,
Hmm.
where you go, oh, all right. So we've been fooled all the time. It doesn't, and I read somewhere that actually, if you go through the details of The Usual Suspects, it doesn't add up. But still, you have a feeling that it adds up. That's what I'm going for. But actually, I do put a lot of effort into making it, being fair. That when you go back and you see what I told you in the first part, it's actually it's logic and it adds up.
And you, I assume you look at that at several times throughout the writing of that it all adds up, and that it's working to where you want to get it to.
Yeah, yeah, I do. I mean, it's I I work thoroughly through stories with long synopsises. Actually, the synopsis is often half the length of the finished novel because I like to have the feeling when I start writing, chapter one, that I can tell my readers, to come sit closer because I have this story to tell you. I know exactly where we're going. Trust me.
You used the word manipulation earlier, and I would just like to explore that with you a little bit. I mean, that's what obviously what writers do, what storytellers do. How have you gotten so good at that, in the sense of what it takes to be good at that, manipulating an audience and bringing them, giving them just enough information to perhaps think one thing but make the other one still plausible when you reveal it?
Uh, I think perhaps the fact that I had strict parents and I had to lie to them without lying to them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So lying to them without lying to them.
yeah, yeah. That when they backtracked what I actually told them, they couldn't. They couldn't say I lied at any point. It was just a construction of the story I told them misled them.
I like that we're using the words manipulation and liar, and those are positives in your line of work.
Yeah, I mean it is a strange job, waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning, being in that state, half asleep and half awake, and you come up with a gruesome murder, and you feel that okay, this is a great start to, to the day. It's this is wonderful. It's going to be a good, nice day.
How much do you think about your readers as you're working on that on that lying, on that manipulation, about what their capacity is for understanding and for going in the direction that you want them to go in?
Well, I think that the problem for writers and filmmakers nowadays is, of course, that our generation of readers are so competent. We have probably consumed 10 times as many stories as our parents and grandparents. So we know all the tricks. I can talk to my daughter when we're looking at movies. I can tell that. I mean, I thought I was pretty good at, detecting what's going on, what's going to be the plot twist, and what is the solution. And I realized that my daughter is even better at that, because she started, analyzing stories and movies when she was 8 years old. And I do believe that my readers are just as intelligent, or even slightly more intelligent than I am. So I have to come up with the plot that would fool me, and I have to, realize that, okay, so I'm giving you a story where I know you have seen this before, and you think it's going to be the same solution, but it's not. This time it's slightly different. So to stay ahead of your readers, it's difficult, of course. And at some point, I guess I won't be able to do that. So I'll watch out for that. I'll ask my daughter what if she thinks I should retire.
When you think of, there's what you write, but it's what you want to write, right? I mean, it's not what you think the audience wants, or necessarily what would be a natural progression for a character. It's what you want to write.
Definitely. I mean, I've been lucky in the way that I never needed to publish anything to pay the rent. So for me, it's I just want to tell the stories. I want, and these are stories that I would want to read, and realizing that nobody else is going to write it, I had to write it myself. And also, I think, for me as a reader, I get annoyed if I feel that accommodated as a reader, that the writer is sort of trying to give me something that he or she thinks that I want. So as a writer, I find it more interesting, both for me and for them, to invite the readers home where I live. So, I get to decide what we're eating, what we're drinking, what music we're listening to. This is my universe, and you're welcome to come in here. And this is what's going on here. And if you find it more interesting to go somewhere else where something else is going on, you're free to go there. But I'm not going to go and try to visit you where I think you live. This is my home, my rules.
Joe Nesbø is our guest. The new book is The Night House, a novel. It is published by Knopf. Did you, or do you read a lot of horror?
I read a lot, but not especially horror. Actually, I mean, it depends on what you define as horror. I mean, I've written my Stephen King books, of course. I was probably more into the hard-boiled American detective novel. My father grew up in the United States, so even if I grew up in Norway, he would bring American literature to the home. And I was probably won't be defined as horror, but I remember Lord of the Flies by William Golding. That was the first book that he actually read to me. I think I must have been 6 or 7 years old. And that was kind of tough. And later on, I really enjoyed Jim Thompson, who was my favorite American crime fiction writer. He was maybe not as famous as Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett, but he was tougher. He was darker. He was like, that was to me like the American Psycho 30 years before Bret Easton Ellis published that book, and so I like the dark side, but it doesn't need to be traditional horror.
So on that dark side, you were working as a stockbroker, you're touring with your band, and then you sit down, and the first book you write is a crime novel. What was it about? Why crime? What was it about that you said, okay, this is the kind of story that I want to tell?
It was a coincidence, and it wasn't particularly the kind of story I set out to tell. It was I had a year with too much to do, so I was more or less burnt out. So I was going to Australia for some months, and it was a girl who worked at the publishing house. she liked the lyrics of the band where I played, and I was the writer. So she said, "Why don't you write something for us? Maybe a story about the band." And I said, I'm not going to write anything about the band, but um, when I get back from Australia, maybe I'll have something else for you." So going there, I knew I had the limited time to write something, and so what should I write? I knew I wanted to write a novel. So, but I figured that maybe it's best to write a crime novel first, because I I know the head and the tail of a crime story. That's simple, and I can do that in a short time. And actually, I wrote a novel in 5 weeks, and I sent it to them. And so I was shocked when they phoned back and they said that we want to publish this. My first reaction was, can I have it back? Because I need to rewrite this, So that became The Bat. That was my first novel, and it established the character Harry Hole. So I wasn't sure I would write a crime novel the next time when I sat down, but I had sort of fallen in love with that interactive conversation that you have with your reader in a who's done it story, that they know you are licensed to, like I said, manipulate them. Your job is to make them watch your right hand while you do the tricks with your left hand. I kind of love that because it meant that they would, I had a feeling that they would stay glued to the pages and study every line for hints, and that's what you want as a writer, I guess, to have the full attention of your reader.
One of the things that I love about the Harry Hole novels is that they do seem to come from that tradition of the hard-boiled detective novel, right? There's a lineage there.
Oh yeah, since I grew up in Norway, I do of course have one foot in the Scandinavian crime fiction tradition, I guess. But like I said, my father, he was an American, so I had one foot in that camp also. So Harry Hole, he was a mix of the two.
When it comes to, you were saying about getting up in the morning and thinking of a gruesome crime, but there is, with this novel, The Night House, and with the Harry Hole novels, that I mean, violence is a part of it, and you are writing about violent acts, and you do that with really such a mastery, and I'm interested how that came about, the evolution of writing about violence and violent acts, and actually even making it different than real life violence.
I think that there's of course a tradition of violence in fairy tales and crime stories, horror stories, and so there's a sort of a unreal violence, symbolic violence. For example, the act of cutting off limbs.
Right.
There is text to that is it's scary reading about it, but it is also the story of a loss. It's heartbreaking, combined with physical pain. There is so much subtext to that is like to me violence that gives you the same feeling as a heartbreak, like losing your loved one. It's a sort of a relationship there that I mean, descriptions of violence may leave you cold, but if it doesn't, it's done the right way. And of course, one can discuss that, whether violence for violence sake, why should we write that? Isn't that just trash? Isn't that just polluting our minds? And yes, I think that may be true, that there is a sort of unhealthy curiosity about pain, torture, and violence. And I certainly have that curiosity too. But I also think that in a story about morality, about moral dilemmas, um, you have to paint your monster in a way that makes the reader realize that something is at stake here. To stop this monster is necessary. And in order to give the reader that feeling, you have to prove to them, not intellectually but emotionally, what's at stake. And violence, for example, is good for that.
We'll close on this, but what do you think it is in us that we want to be scared? We want to read a horror novel. We want to have those chills. We want to have the gruesome for the moment and ultimately have a satisfying conclusion. But there's something we want to be in that space.
Mm. I think that as long as it's in the back of your head that this is not the future, this is not where you're headed, this is just visiting, then it's a place where you want to go, but you also want to know that, okay, I can leave and shut the door behind me and nobody is coming after me. I think that's the good thing about a book. You can actually shut it.
Would you write another horror novel?
I would. I love to. It's but like I said, my boss is the story. That's the only boss I have. So if I come up with an idea that orders me to sit down with my laptop and write a horror story, I will obey.
Joe Nesbø's new novel is The Night House. It is published by Knopf. Joe, it's always a great pleasure to speak to you. I thank you so much for spending time with us. An honor to have you on the program.
Thank you so much, Joe.
Again, Joe Nesbø's new novel is The Night House, published by Knopf. Thanks to our producer, Sarah LeDuc. Write to us at book@wamc.org. The latest on National Productions programs is available via the Airwaves newsletter at wamc.org and on social media at WAMC Radio. Bookmark us for next week. And thanks for listening for The Book Show. I'm Joe Donahue.